Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and here we are for discussion number one. This week's assigned readings, I gotta tell you, the scientific management principle by Frederick Taylor, that is the ideal way that we as employees would love to work for a corporation that follows that. In fact, if you look through history, some of the good sports teams, um, corporations that have been successful over the years, for example, the Walt Disney Corporation under Bob Iger, Lucasfilm now under Kathleen Kennedy, you notice a progression of success that is constant and consistent. And part of it is following some of the philosophies of scientific management. When you go to sports, I don't think we need to go that far. We can go to uh, Phil Jackson, the former coach of the Chicago Bulls and Los Angeles Lakers. He's done what, 13 national championships, 11 as a coach, 2 as a player. That's unbelievable. Right now, in more modern times, you look at Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots with Mr. Kraft and what they've done in New England. If we go back to the 80s, it would be the San Francisco 49ers under Ed DeBartolo. You go even further than that, it would have to be Vince Lombardi and the Green Bay Packers as they were consistent. And though they won the first 2 Super Bowls, prior to that, before the NFL and AFL got into the Super Bowl thingy, they won 3 NFL championships, which were like the Super Bowl. So they won like 5 in a row, the only ones that have really done that. So you can see that when you have good management principles, things can flourish. Now, reality. It doesn't always work that way. And every one of us, including those of you in this class, know that we've all had bosses where we're like, wow, you sit behind a desk and you don't know what happens at the front line personnel. You don't know. Frontline personnel, on the other hand, has all the information because they're the ones that do it constantly, day in and day out. It doesn't matter what kind of public government work you do, it's almost all the same thing. You've got those grunt individuals that are the ones that have the what I call the work experience know-how, which technically, uh, recently, and we're going to talk about recently, maybe a couple years, they've actually, maybe a decade, they've actually started giving credence to street level experience as being an expert, because once you do a job day in, day out, you know the idiosyncrasies of how things go. You know the hooks, crooks, and the crannies, uh, where management at times can become detached. So the management principle is good. If you follow the 4 steps, oh my God, you're going to have a management that knows everything. That means you're going to put away all the egos aside. You're going to have line personnel that are not only going to know what they're doing and continue to build on their experience, but you're now going to develop them professionally through certification and possibly some sort of education or technical college. And then you're going to go ahead and work hand in hand and share ideas. That's wonderful. In a perfect world, oh my gosh, that would be great. That doesn't happen. Too many things in the way. Backstabbing, double dealing, snake in the grass co-workers that want to one up you. Management that's afraid that, hey, this guy is going to try to take my job. Screw him. Uh, that stuff, unfortunately, little by little has a big play in how things affect in a corporation, how things work out. Um, as we get down to the micromanagement point, I'm going to tell you this. Um, I have looked at a couple of videos, and I'll respond to a couple. There's one individual that talked about, he had a great time in micromanagement. I will tell you this right now. I've been a line supervisor uh, in my line of work, or sergeant, corporal, and I followed the Trunkman model of team building, bottom line. You can't micromanage people because people will go ahead and rebel. They will go into, if you read Sun Tzu's Art of Warfare, which every Japanese corporate head must read, it's required reading if you are uh, tops, if you're the big management people, you have to read the book. It's required for employment. Unbelievable. We should do that here. Your own employees will resort to guerrilla warfare, and they will do everything in their power to undermine you from behind the scenes. And you may be strong, But 4, 5 individuals together, combined, even if they're weak, can do a lot of damage. The truckman model, what it is you basically build your team up from the bottom up, where you introduce yourself, you get your expectations out there, you're going to have to correct deficiencies, you've got to present the model, management's model, but at the same time understand their personal needs, all to bring out the best possible product without hindering the directives of management and getting individuals to buy into what you're doing. With micromanagement, that doesn't happen. When you have a micromanager, and you have, in my experience, you have an individual that has been put in a position of management either by favoritism, political situation, friendship, very seldom, and I can't say this for everyone, is someone appointed into a management position because of their know-how. In my experience, with what I've seen, it has not been that way. There's been a couple, few and far, and they turn out to be pretty good because they started at the bottom, rose to the top, and they've maintained that criteria. They never forgot where they came from. But in reality, most individuals that are micromanagers lack the academic preparation for the position, the certification that gives them the knowledge of the trades, the tool and the trades of the business. They also lack some sort of people skills, and they know it. They have an egotistical problem. They're monomaniacal. In other words, they know they're like the old hardcore Generation Xers, that it's my way and the only way. There's no speech and there's no debate. Now you go to the other extreme, the millennials and some of the Generation Y individuals, and guess what? Oh, we want to debate everything. Why are you telling me to do this? Why is that important? Well, that doesn't always work that way. You got to do what you get paid to do, not think. That's the mentality. But when you work for a micromanager, you don't really invest in what you're doing because it's everything at the whim of the individual. I can tell you an example I had of an individual which was my boss, and I couldn't stand him because he was a micromanager. He was the kind of person that from the minute you came to work to the minute you left, he wanted to account for everything that you did. From the moment you go to the bathroom, from the minute that you talk to someone, why did you write this report? Why is that line in the report? And why aren't you out there doing this? And why didn't we do this? And why didn't we do that? And why are you standing there? It gets to a point where at first you try to work with the individual because unfortunately when you're a subordinate you have to work with what you got. But in the long run you start resenting that person, and then you're only going to do the bare minimum to get by just so that he can get off your back, but he never really does, or she never really does. Micromanagers are not good leaders. They're not. They rule by fear, and academic studies have shown that when you have a supervisor or management that does that, you're going to end up not wanting to perform. I apologize for that, making some noise according to the video. They're not going to want to work. Right now we've got a captain. She has very little education, but she's in a position because of her political appointment. She contributed a lot of money to the sheriff's campaign, and they've got her in there. And she's very hard to work with. She doesn't know very well her position, and her subordinates run scared. In fact, when she gives a phone call, their blood pressure goes up. And every time they do something good, it's bad, and when it's bad, it's worse. You can't work with someone like that. You really can't. Now, you got to have some discipline, and you need to have individuals that are authoritarian, because if you don't, then the other extreme occurs. You know what they say, when the cat's away, the mice come out and play. You get some of that. You have to, but there's a difference with an authoritarian individual that is an alpha individual that wants you to get the job done. It's going to get done a certain way, the way that person wants you, but at the same time, they're flexible enough to listen to what you have to say. They're very cognizant in adding input, and your input to what you're trying to do with the organization. Micromanagement is not the way to go. Those of you that think that micromanagement is positive, you just haven't had the right one. My experience has been that they're not good. And myself, for personal development, they've been horrible because they never want you to go to training. In fact, I'll tell you what the boss that I had did to me one day. I put in a request to go to training. It was to get the laser certification because I was only radar certified. And it was only a 12-hour transition course. Now they eliminated that course and you have to do a whole 40-hour one. But back then you could do the 12-hour transition as long as you had the 40-hour radar class. I submitted my memo, gave it to him, and he looked at me and this is what he said. Germ, are you trying to educate yourself? You don't need this crap. Got the piece of paper, went right to the shredder. I didn't take the training. I didn't like that. So as an individual, not only could I not develop professionally, when it came to asking for time off, it was almost having to go in front of Congress and Inquisition Board and having to explain why, even though they gave you time to take off. When it comes to doing the job, you can't really do anything because you're stuck. If I do this, I get in trouble. If I don't do that, I get in trouble. And every other minute, you gotta give them a phone call. That doesn't work. Statistics show that when you let an employee work and you're not on top of them, you get more productivity. There's a difference between not supervising them. They have to be supervised. But there's a very big difference in being there in every little minutia. And some of you guys know what I'm talking about. And this concludes presentation number 1.